One of the joys about being Canadian is that you're exposed to certain media that you would have never even heard of if you weren't Canadian. Even though Canadian media doesn't get nearly the same amount of notoriety as that produced by our Yankee friends down south, there actually is some genuinely great, or at the very least underrated Canadian content that often gets overlooked, sometimes even by us Canadians. In Canada, we have something called CanCon, which basically means that a certain amount of media broadcast must be explicitly Canadian. 40% of music played on the radio must be Canadian, and cable TV must play Canadian programming 55% yearly or 50% daily. Now, there are various rules set in place as to what constitutes music or television as Canadian, but regardless, to make sure that Canada isn't completely outshined by American entertainment, Canadian radio and television stations must be the required threshold of Canadian content. This is why Canadian radio stations play a lot of Bryan Adams, Celine Dion, Michael Bublé, and other Canadian artists, and why Canadian pop stations play a lot of Canadian pop artists that Americans don't know about, like Marianas Trench or Tyler Shaw. Did you know that Magic had other songs besides Rude? Well, if you lived in Canada, you would have heard a few of their other singles on the radio. They weren't a one-hit wonder band up here. Similar rules apply to TV too. Now, I mainly talk about cartoons online, and Canada has had a big hand in producing children's animation as well. In Canada, when I was a kid, we had 4 main kids channels. YTV, which played most of the Nickelodeon shows and is basically the Canadian equivalent to Nickelodeon. Teletoon, which is basically the Canadian equivalent to Cartoon Network. The Family Channel, basically the Canadian Disney Channel. And Treehouse, which was a preschool channel that aired most of the Nick Jr. shows. Although the former 3 channels did have their own preschool shows that weren't on Treehouse, and all 4 of these channels have had original Canadian kids shows. Many American cartoon fans are probably aware of some of Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network's acquisitions from YTV and Teletoon, like Johnny Test, Total Drama, 16, Pelswick, and Wayside. But there's even more Canadian cartoons that are a little more obscure that many American cartoon fans may not know about. I mean, to be fair, a lot of Canadian cartoons, especially post-2006, are mediocre. Many say this is in part due to CanCon laws requiring shows to be rushed to be completed so that the 55% yearly or 50% daily threshold can be met, which compromises these cartoons' quality. But there are still a handful of underrated gems that don't get much recognition, even by us Canadians, because they never had many reruns after their cancellation and had limited to no airing outside of Canada. Today, I'm going to talk about an underrated, obscure Canadian cartoon that I remember seeing as a kid and was reminded of again a little while ago thanks to my friend DJ, or No Parking Barry. That is, the Family Channel cartoon, King.
Okay, here's how it happened. We moved into a new house. I know this sounds weird, but I found a secret passage under my bed. And there was another world down there called Under. And I am king of the whole crazy place.
Created by Gordon Coulthart, King is a cartoon about a 12-year-old boy named Russell Wright. After he and his family move into a new house, Russell discovers a passageway underneath his bed in his new bedroom. The passageway leads him to an alternate world, and in this world resides a kingdom called Under. Russell soon discovers that, since he came from the world over the bed, he is heir to Under's throne. After familiarizing himself with the new world and getting into some shenanigans, Russell's crowned King of Under and dubbed King Russell the Right. King premiered on the Family Channel in 2003 and lasted for 52 episodes spanning 2 seasons. I remember watching the show on the Family Channel when I was like 7 to 8 years old, and I was definitely excited to rewatch the show again to see if it's as good as I remember it being as a kid, only this time, I'd be watching the entire show. So, let's take a look and see what we got. One trope I've noticed a lot when it comes to a lot of kids shows, especially kids cartoons, is the fact that they fall under the category of what I like to call not your everyday kid shows. You've seen this kind of show before. It's a show about a kid who lives an everyday life, going to school, dealing with family, putting up with bullies, etc. But there's a certain thing about this kid that sets them apart from everyone else. That one thing is usually a fantastical element and kept a secret from everyone else, with the exception of a few people. And it's that one thing about them that the show's premise is built around. I can name plenty of kids' cartoons off the top of my head that follow this trope. Dexter's Laboratory, The Fairly OddParents, Danny Phantom, etc. Even some live-action kids sitcoms like The Secret World of Alex Mack or Henry Danger follow this premise. In all of these shows, the kid protagonist struggles with everyday things, except there's some fantastical element to their lives that only they and a few other people know about. In Dexter's Laboratory, Dexter has a secret laboratory underneath his bedroom, and the only people who know are him and his sister Dee Dee. In The Fairly OddParents, Timmy Turner has magical fairy godparents who grant his every wish, and the only people who know are fairies, other fairies, and a handful of minor characters. In Danny Phantom, Danny Fenton has ghost powers, and the only people who know are him, his friend Sam and Tucker, and later on the show his sister Jazz. And, well, King follows this premise too. In King, Russell has an alternate world underneath his bed where he's king, and the only people who know are him, the citizens of Under, and one more character who we'll talk about later. And if their parents or anyone else do find out about their secret, that means it's either the final episode, it's a dream, or they'll have their memory wiped before the episode ends. The appeal of these shows comes from imagining that you're in the main character's shoes, having a secret laboratory underneath your house, having magical fairies that grant your every wish, having ghost powers, and of course, being king of a world underneath your bed. It's an escape show. I'll say right up front that if you find this premise to be too cliche, this show might not be for you. Of course, all 4 of these shows have unique spins on this premise, and it would be ridiculous to call any of them rip-offs of each other. Additionally, I will also admit that the premise of a person finding an alternate world through a door or passageway is not a super unique premise. I can think of plenty of media that are about something similar. But I am kind of a sucker for this kind of premise, and I can say that King does enough new with it for me to not think it's ripping off Alice in Wonderland, though maybe it was loosely inspired by it. Something else about King that I find rather interesting is the fact that Under is a real in-universe location. Under isn't just part of Russell's imagination or something. It's a real physical place that he really does go to in every episode. This is actually established in episode 1, and it's enforced throughout the show. The Underwrights, the citizens of Under, are actually able to come up into Russell's bedroom, which actually happens a couple times in the show. In addition, things that happen in Under can and sometimes do affect Up. By the way, Up is what the Underwrights call Russell's world. Everything that's not under Russell's bed is Up. For example, in the episode Pollen Holiday, there's a flower bush in Under that emanates a pollen that causes everyone in Under to fall asleep. This pollen actually comes up into Russell's bedroom and causes anyone in Russell's bedroom who breathes it in to get zonked. As such, Russell has to wear an astronaut helmet when he goes to Under and not be affected. And there's plenty of other times in this show where a creature or something else that came from Under comes out from under Russell's bed and into his bedroom. I find the decision to have the world of Under be a real physical location in show to be an interesting choice. I personally think the show could have taken its premise in a slightly different way by having Under not be a real location. Maybe in the first episode, Russell is sad and depressed about moving to a new town because he left all of his friends and memories there, so to comfort himself, he imagines a world underneath his bed where he's the king to make himself feel better, and everything that happens there are metaphors for struggles and challenges he's facing in his new town. Actually, that could be a good premise for another cartoon. But they don't go that route. I suppose it's not really worth trying to ponder why or how the world of Under exists in the first place, or come up with some sort of theory as to why this house has this world inside of it, or which came first, Under, or the house's construction. You're just supposed to accept Under's existence, like how the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe readers are supposed to accept Narnia's existence. Most episodes of King follow a pretty similar format. Russell ends up facing some sort of issue in Up. Either he receives a bad grade at school, he's trying to hide from the local bully Cliff, he's trying to earn a Gopher Scout merit badge, or something else. So Russell decides to go to Under to take his mind off his problem, get some help with it, or just have some fun. When he gets to Under, there's usually some sort of strange, surreal phenomenon happening, and said phenomenon ends up becoming the core of the episode's plot. And usually the problem Russell had in Up either gets resolved in Under, or he figures out how to fix it when he goes back to Up. Sometimes an episode occasionally has a moral for kids. Tell the truth, study for your tests, make friends instead of enemies, that kind of thing. Although I wouldn't call King a moral-driven show, they do occasionally occur. Thankfully though, they're not spoon-fed to the audience. The world of Under is very surreal. It's the kind of place where just about anything can happen. You never know what's going to happen there or how things will play out. Many episode plots have very strange concepts, and the world of Under often follows its own logic. I mentioned before about the episode Pollen Holiday. After Russell goes down to Under and finds the flower bush responsible for zonking everyone, he ties it to a balloon floating away, and everyone in Under wakes up from their slumber. After this happens, a horde of monsters begin marching towards Under, and King Russell frantically tries to find a way to get them to turn away. As it turns out, it's Bush Pollen Holiday in Under, and the monsters approaching come to hatch their babies this time every year and then go home, and no one in Under noticed till now because they normally be asleep during this time. Oh, by the way, epilepsy warning for a short 3-second scene in this episode. There's actually a number of episodes of this show where a creature or creatures from near or around Under come and terrorize the kingdom, or get close to doing so, and King Russell has to find a way to stop them. Another common plotline that happens in this show is that Russell ends up losing his crown and has to go finding it before one of the villains does, as whoever is currently wearing the crown is technically the king. They take this plot in a few different directions, often mixing with some surreal concept that could only happen in Under. In the episode Down the Dark with the Yu-Yus, Russell's crown ends up getting washed down the drain while trying to give his dog a sponge bath in Under, and they end up going to Under, a place underground that's, well, under. In Under, everything is decided via dice roll. Both Russell and one of the show's villains, who's also after the crown, both claim it and roll dice to determine who the true ruler is. But after they both roll the same number and tie, Hugh, the leader of Under, comes up with a new challenge to determine the true ruler. They both have to try and run away from a monster known as a Slither, and the last one of them standing gets the crown. Other episodes of the show are just flat out bizarre. In the episode Never Be Nice to a Pudrick, there's a small purple furry creature called the Pudrick, who the Underwrights use as a scapegoat for all their problems. So King Russell decrees a new rule that nobody can blame the Pudrick for anything anymore. Unfortunately, this goes awry when the Pudrick grows into a monstrous height and begins attacking the kingdom because That's what happens to an unblamed Pudrick. The Pudrick is only small and cuddly when it's blamed for stuff. Yeah, this is the kind of show we're talking about here. Here's another example. In the episode The Egg Effect, King Russell and another character named Auntie First both get eaten by a creature known as a gird. They're both laid as eggs, and when they hatch, they both become attracted to the first thing they see. The first thing Auntie First sees is a member of Russell's palace, and she falls in love with him Pepe Le Pew style, never letting him out of her sight or arms. The first thing King Russell sees is an unclimbable mountain, and is mesmerized in trying to climb to the top of it, despite the fact that the troll who owns the mountain can pull a switch and keep making it infinitely taller. Yeah, this is what I mean when I say the show follows its own logic. Whenever Russell is in the world of Under, you never know what kind of strange, bizarre thing is going to happen. Maybe Russell will get a tail and ends up using it to become a circus performer in Under, doing acrobatics. Maybe Russell will get arrested for a crime he hasn't committed yet, but is apparently going to do in the future, and he doesn't even know what that crime is. Maybe Russell will end up infecting the Underites with his cold, and instead of making them sick, it turns them into superheroes. Man, I wonder how COVID would affect them. It may be easy to predict the outcomes of some episodes, but it's how the episode gets to the ending that's the exciting part, not the ending itself. Also, one more thing. This show does occasionally have some gross humor. I definitely wouldn't call King a gross-out show, but some episodes of the show do have the characters going through the sewer or visiting the Flatland Swamp, a location near Under, or have other kind of gross plots. In the episode Good Stenches Make Bad Neighbors, Under has a bean belch cook-off, which results in the Underites constantly farting and the whole kingdom being shrunk down and used to power an engine created by the big cloud ball, which runs on bad smells. Yeah, that's another weird and out there plotline. Although there isn't much information about the show's production online or how Gordon Coldheart came up with the idea for the show, there's quite a few things that seem to provide the inspiration for it. Many of the show's bizarre premises and locations in the world of Under remind me of something out of a Dr. Seuss book. To be honest, at a glance, some shots of the world of Under almost look like a Dr. Seuss illustration. The living furniture in King Russell's palace makes me think of Beauty and the Beast. In particular, the table that sometimes brings him a glass of water when he first arrives in Under reminds me of the dog in the Beast's castle that turned to a footrest. And the passageway down to Under, filled with a bunch of stairways in different orientations, makes me think of the works of M.C. Escher. It's sort of like a foreshadow to the viewer that when Russell's going down to Under for the first time in episode 1, he's going to find some sort of strange, otherworldly place down there, and, well, he does. Then, of course, there's the aforementioned Door to Another World media like Alice in Wonderland. Many of the episode's bizarre premises with simple morals also feel like something you read about in a fantasy children's book. Part of me actually wonders if Gordon Coldheart originally wanted King to be a book or a book series before pitching it as a cartoon. Okay, so that's enough about the show's premise and setting. Let's talk about the characters. First up, we have our series protagonist, Russell Wright / King Russell the Wright. Like I said before, King is an escape show. Part of the appeal comes from imagining yourself in the main character's shoes, and I'm sure a kid watching the show could imagine themselves going through Russell's adventures, being the king of an alternate world underneath their bed. And I think Russell fits the kind of character kids could imagine themselves as quite well. He's a very sensible and reasonable ruler of Under, and compared to many of the past kings, he's righteous, albeit sometimes prideful. Although even he can occasionally make things worse for the Underites though, such as decreeing a new law that eventually ends up causing conflict or trouble. Still, he does try to fix his mistakes whenever possible. Outside of his kingly status, Russell likes comic books, video games, and he seems to have a catchphrase with saying yonkers.
Yonkers! 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 Yonkers!
Oh, and one more thing. Russell's voice gets deeper in the second half of season 2. Mark Rendell, Russell's voice actor, was a child actor at the time, and he ended up hitting puberty during the show's production.
We keep turning these blocks around till we have a door. Same as level 10 in Zendak's Revenge. You know, the video game.
Okay, we can't stand up against him, so we have to outsmart him. Distract him somehow.
Anyway, next up, we have Russell's pet dog, Gus. Gus always comes to Under with Russell, and like all animals from Up, he's actually able to talk while in Under.
The wee bouncy lad has a point. I think we should be off.
You talked.
Aye, so I did. And I still think we should go.
Of course, once he and Russell go back to Up, Gus is mute again. I like the fact that he's a Scottish accent, given that he's a Highland Terrier. He's very brave, gutsy, and is also known for giving a lot of sarcastic quips, usually to Russell.
That smoothest peanut butter plan of yours? It just went crunchy.
I suppose if I did wear pants, they would be smarty.
It's my accordion. It's an instrument.
Of torture.
Still, he is loyal to Russell and loves him as his owner, just like how he also loves Wrigley pies. Then we have Vernon and Loopy, two members of Russell's palace. Vernon is an android built by someone known as the Clockmaker. He essentially serves as Russell's advisor and mechanic, and is often seen building or working on various inventions, or building/fixing something that Russell asks him to build or fix. Loopy is a court jester. He's silly, carefree, and cowardly, and enjoys butterflies and picking flowers. Vernon and Loopy are often seen slap fighting, enforcing a new law the Russells decreed, or working on something Russell asked them to do, like his homework.
Good girl, Buffy. Now remember, 12 by 20 by 10 feet deep.
So, what's the deal?
King Russell's homework. Math, tricky stuff.
Then we have ex-Princess Popula, the former princess of Near Under, a nearby country that's, well, near under. She abdicated her position from royalty due to it being more trouble than it was worth, although still continues to wear her crown. She's generally friendly and often accompanies Russell on his adventures in Under, giving him a ride on her Sky Cow when needed. She stands out amongst Russell's allies in Under thanks to her southern accent and athletic abilities. As for the antagonists in Under, we have Bob Wire, a character who, as the pun on his name suggests, is literally made out of coils of barbed wire. He's a con artist who often partakes in various shenanigans and pulls several stunts, all in the attempt to steal King Russell's crown and be king himself. Most of his plans to get the crown or intimidate the Underites, or Schmeds as he calls everyone, aren't very well thought out, ranging from fear-mongering about some imaginary creature called the Kleng to trying to sell real estate when the moon is about to crash into Under and destroy the Underites' homes. It's shown a few times in the show that the Underites aren't very bright and will often believe whatever Bob Wire says. On a few occasions, Bob actually is successful in getting King Russell's crown and is briefly king in several episodes. But of course, Russell always ends up getting his crown back before the end of the episode to maintain the status quo. Bob's also a really good blues singer.
I got the blues in one leg, but the other leg is fine. Oh, yeah. Ain't no cure for one leg blues till the crown of Under's mine.
Hey Cal Dodd, you should be a real singer. I'd listen to an album if you recorded one. Bob Wire also has two little green creatures by his side known as Frags, who essentially serve as his henchmen, helping him with whatever scheme he's cooked up to cause mayhem or steal the crown. They're generally more intelligent than he is, and their voices will suddenly switch from high-pitched to low-pitched every once in a while, akin to frogs croaking.
This is the joint, Thornhop's Cafe.
Undrian.
That asymptote keeps hanging around. You can
Franchise.
the joint.
Then there's Auntie First, despot of Near Under and populous aunt. She's cruel, self-absorbed, narcissistic, and hates anyone intruding on her country, although she does have a lovey-dovey smoochy side to her too. Many episodes with her involve her hatching a plan to invade or take over Under as her own. Then there's Captain Darling, her British-accented right-hand man who's a lot more polite and empathetic than his boss. Despite that though, he's loyal to Auntie First and carries out whatever orders she gives him. Auntie First also has a cousin named Tess, who rules Undersea and with whom Auntie has a feud with. As for the other humans from Up, there's Russell's family, his mom, dad, and older sister Lou. They don't have a very big role in the show and are relegated to tertiary cast. In fact, Russell's dad has no dialogue in the show whatsoever and is only seen for a few short scenes every once in a while. From what we see of Lou, she's basically the older teenage sister archetype. The valley girl who's annoyed by her little brother, but deep down does actually care about him. Russell's family is usually just there to create conflict, with the fear of them coming into his room and discovering Under, akin to Timmy Turner hiding Cosmo and Wanda, or Danny Phantom hiding being half ghost. Finally, we have Cliff. Cliff is basically the stereotypical grade school bully character. He's often seen picking on Russell, pulling pranks on him, or calling him names whenever he's in Up. However, there is one more role Cliff does serve on the show. He was the previous king of Under. He lived in Russell's house last and had Russell's bedroom. In Under, he's known as King Cliff the Grim and is considered to be Under's worst king due to having Bob Wire as his right-hand man, as well as his poor hygiene, selfishness, and immaturity. No doubt his jealousy of Russell now being king of Under is why Russell is Cliff's primary target for bullying. A few episode subplots actually involve Cliff trying to sneak into Under and reclaim his place as king. It's never actually explained in the show why Cliff's family moved out of the house. I suppose it's not that important. They could have just said Cliff's dad got a job on the other side of town or something. Cliff also has a sister named Sissy who has a crush on Russell, much to Russell's disgust. Occasionally, through a flashback in the show, we learn about one of the kings before Cliff. All of Under's kings have been kids. By the way, since this is a cartoon, I suppose I should talk about the show's animation. It's fine. It's not groundbreaking or anything, but it's decent. The character designs of the humans are passable, and there are some creative designs with all the creatures and monsters in Under. I also like the frequent use of crown shapes in the show, especially in Under. It's a unique aesthetic and fitting for a show called King, and it's one way to make the world of Under look visually distinct from Up. The world of Under also utilizes a color palette of yellow, beige, green, and purple, a clear contrast to the more natural-looking color palette of Up. Aside from a couple of animation errors, which I can forgive seeing that plenty of cartoons on TV have occasional animation errors, there's nothing in the technical department that looks bad. Well, that is except for the episode Run Russell Run, which has some very clear unfinished animation. But thankfully that's just for one episode. Aside from that, I wouldn't really expect too much from a show on a TV budget, especially since this is a Canadian cartoon, not an American cartoon, so it's not going to be seen by nearly as many people as a show from Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network. I will say that I am glad this show came out before the rise of Flash animation. If this show came out like 5 years later, I could definitely see it being animated with cheap-looking Flash. If there is a nitpick I do have with the animation, aside from the episode Run, Russell, Run, it's that I would have liked it if maybe the animation under was a lot more cartoonier than Up. Maybe have the facial expressions of the Underites be wackier and the movements be a lot slicker, just to show that Under is a much more wacky, over-the-top world than Up is. But it's not really too bad. Overall, while by no means a perfect show or something I call a masterpiece, I actually do think that King was overall a pretty good cartoon. I love the premise, even if it's not a totally original one, the unique setting, the surreal plot lines, and the bizarre concepts. This is one show that definitely did stick with me as a kid, and one that I was definitely excited to revisit after about 15 years of last seeing it. Like I said before, my friend DJ, or No Parking Berry, reminded me of the show a little while ago when he drew X-Princess Popula in one of his drawing live streams, as a request for me to draw a character from a Canadian cartoon. He told me that the show was actually legally available to stream for free on Tubi TV, at least here in Canada. I'm not sure about the American version. So I decided to go and check it out. Unfortunately, only the first half of Season 1 is available there. I'm not sure why, and I'm also not sure if the show in its entirety was ever available there. The second half of Season 1 and the entirety of Season 2 I was able to watch on YouTube. Illegally there, yes, but I don't believe there's any other way to watch the last 75% of it. Between the show's obscurity and the fact that barely anyone remembers it, I'd be hard-pressed to believe there's any sort of full physical release like a DVD box set. However, I am glad that I could give a Canadian cartoon that I remember from my childhood some much-deserved attention. Canadian cartoons do kind of get a bad reputation, but don't let all the mediocre Flash animated Canadian cartoons in the late 2000s or the 2010s sully your opinion on Canadian animation. And I am glad there are some people out there like the Wacky Deli who are bringing these shows to the attention of American audiences. Like I said at the beginning of this video, there is some genuinely great underrated Canadian content out there, and CanCon laws make sure that if you're Canadian, you'll consume at least a bit of it. But not every Canadian cartoon gets aired in America, and I think that's kind of a shame. I know there's only so much airspace and not every show from every country can air everywhere, but I think King would have been a great addition to Americans' possession of Canadian cartoons. I could have easily seen it being acquired by one of the big 3 American kids channels and airing in the mid-2000s, but alas. Of course, cartoons aren't the only Canadian media that have limited recognition outside the land of maple syrup. Maybe in the future, I'll do a video on some of my favorite songs by Canadian artists that Americans have never heard of, but for now, here's just one piece of Canadian content for you all. If you can legally find the show somewhere, then I definitely recommend checking it out. I'd probably rate the show a good 7 out of 10. For any of my Canadian viewers who are around my age, do you remember King? If so, what do you think of it? For anyone who's never seen the show, does it interest you? Are there any obscure cartoons from your childhood that you like that not many people remember? Let me know in the comments. Again, if you are legally able to find the show, go watch it. You wouldn't believe the stuff that happens in Under. Or maybe you would.